Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where every cough might be a curse, every neighbor might be a witch, and paranoia spreads quicker than smallpox on market day. You're trudging into the sleepy backwoods of colonial Massachusetts, where the year is 1692, and the vibes are, let's say, suspicious. It's cold here. Not just the regular kind of cold. This is soul-level cold. The kind where the trees crack at night, chimneys sputter like they're haunted, and nobody trusts anyone who owns a black cat, or worse, knits on Sundays. You can practically feel the frost creeping up your stockings. Salem Village is a farming town, sure, but lately it's more of a rumor factory. You're in a place where the forest edge is in close, where howling wolves aren't the scariest thing in the dark, and where the only thing growing faster than corn is suspicion. The Puritans who run the place are deeply devout, rigid in their beliefs, and absolutely convinced that the devil is actively recruiting in their very own neighborhood. And guess what? You're about to see how that worked out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all starts in a parsonage. That's a fancy term for the minister's house, where Reverend Samuel Parris lives with his daughter Betty and his niece Abigail. Seems innocent enough. But in the dead of winter, when the wind hisses through the cracks in wooden shutters, and boredom clings to your bones like smoke, even a sneeze can start a scandal. Betty is 9. Abigail is 11. And they're weird. Not child genius building a clock weird, more like falling into trances, barking like dogs, and flinging themselves around the parsonage floor. Which, to be fair, might just be how kids act when they're raised by Puritans with 0 toys and absolutely no TikTok. But back then, this isn't considered a behavioral hiccup. This is witchcraft-adjacent behavior. Word spreads. Because of course it does. You can't even borrow sugar in Salem Village without it becoming a theological debate. And when the local doctor arrives, looks at the girl's symptoms, and literally shrugs and says, "Yeah, I think it's witchcraft," you know this story's about to take a very dark nap. Historians still argue whether the girls were truly ill, suffering from stress, or just leaning a little too hard into the 17th century version of community theater. Was it ergot poisoning from bad rye? Trauma? Possession? Teen drama with a side of religious fervor? Pick your theory, none of them are particularly comforting. What's clear is this: once those girls claimed to be afflicted by witches, the entire village exhaled centuries of pent-up fear. Suddenly, everyone had a theory, a name, or a petty grudge that could be repackaged as holy outrage. Even today, if you walk those cracked paths near the old parsonage foundation, you'll hear stories. Maybe it's just the wind through the trees, or maybe it's the feeling that something terrible started here. Something that built slowly, like frost on glass, until it cracked the whole town in half. By the time the village realized how deep the shadows ran, it was too late. And remember, if you lived in 1692 Salem, you probably wouldn't survive this. You haven't even warmed your boots by the hearth when things escalate. You're still lingering near Reverend Paris's parsonage, maybe poking at a stale crust of bread, when suddenly the girl's afflictions grow, louder, more dramatic. Screaming, writhing, hurling random accusations mid-convulsion, it's a full performance, and the village is riveted. Abigail Williams and Betty Paris aren't alone for long. Other local girls join the act, or maybe the affliction, it depends who you ask. And Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and a few others all begin showing signs. They twitch, they contort, they claim to see visions of witches pinching them, biting them, even turning into animals. Cats, birds, wolves, it's like a supernatural petting zoo. And you're watching all this with a slow, creeping dread. Because these girls, they're not just having episodes, they're naming names. It begins in whispers. Tituba, the enslaved woman in the Paris household, is among the first to be accused. She's an easy target, enslaved, foreign, and said to tell stories of spirits from her Caribbean upbringing. Some accounts suggest she taught the girls little bits of folklore or magic for fun. Others say she simply existed too colorfully in a world of beige. Either way, the fingers point to her first. Then comes Sarah Good, a homeless woman known for mumbling to herself, though honestly, you would too if you lived in a drafty hut and everyone gave you side eyes at the market. And then Sarah Osborne, who hadn't been to church in ages and had the audacity to marry a servant. These women don't stand a chance. You realize quickly the afflicted girls have power. Real, terrifying social power. And that power is being wielded like a butter knife in a thunderstorm, clumsy, random, and very likely to end in disaster. Historians still argue whether the girls were play acting, genuinely traumatized, or swept up in some kind of religious psychosis. Maybe it was attention seeking. Maybe it was mass hysteria. Or maybe it was the only available form of rebellion in a world where young girls were expected to be silent, obedient, and thoroughly boring. But the effect is the same. By naming these women, the girls turn vague unease into concrete blame. And Salem Village eats it up like cold porridge on a stormy morning. You, poor traveler, now find yourself in a town divided. Some folks are genuinely terrified. Others are deeply suspicious, but stay quiet, because pointing out the flaws in a witch accusation is a suspicious act in itself. And the girls? They're doubling down. More names. More fits. More reasons to be scared of the dark. There's a moment, one sharp, weird little detail that sticks with you. The girls claim to be tormented not just in person, but by specters, ghost-like doubles of the accused that float around poking them invisibly. It's like being hexed by a dream version of your neighbor. One of the afflicted even says a woman's spirit turned into a yellow bird and sat on the rafters during church. This is where the rules of logic quietly leave the building. If you deny the charges, it means your specter is guilty. If you confess, you're guilty, but may be spared. If you point the finger at someone else, congratulations, you're part of the survival game now. And you can't help but notice how the accusations start to slide toward personal enemies. Old land disputes. Inheritance squabbles. church rivalries. Suddenly witchcraft is less about demons and more about who insulted your cousin at last year's barn raising. Still, every morning, the town gathers to whisper about the latest possessed girl and her next accusation. You're not even sure if the afflicted are faking anymore. The line between belief and performance has smudged like ink in the rain. And here's the weirdest part. The whole time, it's mostly just happening in one little cluster of Massachusetts. Other nearby towns watch from a distance, concerned but unconvinced. They send notes, send ministers, send suggestions. But Salem Village barrels forward like a goat on a greased hill. And there you stand, somewhere in the middle of it all, watching as a few teenage girls shake an entire society to its foundations. By now, you're realizing that Salem doesn't really do chill. You'd like a moment to gather your thoughts, maybe enjoy a warm bowl of corn mush in peace, but instead, you're in the town center, watching a woman bake a witch cake. Yes, a witch cake. The logic goes like this. If someone is afflicted by witchcraft, the way to reveal the culprit is by taking the afflicted person's urine, mixing it into rye meal, baking it into a small cake, and feeding it to a dog. Naturally. Because obviously the dog will react in some supernatural way, confirming who cast the spell. Or something. You're not entirely sure, and frankly, neither is anyone else. The baker of this curious pastry? Mary Sibley, a relative of the Paris household, and just your average Puritan citizen dabbling in a bit of occult baking. It might not be in the Bible, but desperate times call for urinary confections. She instructs Tituba to help make the cake, a fact that would not help Tituba's reputation one bit. Historians still argue whether the witch cake was meant as a serious test, a folk remedy, or just small-town culinary panic. Either way, Reverend Paris isn't thrilled when he finds out. His reaction is somewhere between "this is unholy" and "you fed pee to my dog," and the scandal intensifies. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, or rather, the makeshift room used for pretrial questioning, things are already getting surreal. Tituba is arrested, along with Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, and brought before the magistrates. The afflicted girls are present too, rolling their eyes back and flailing as soon as the accused speak. It's the 1692 version of a courtroom drama, but with more moaning and fewer procedural objections. Here's where it gets truly strange. Tituba confesses. She claims that yes, she did speak with the devil. Yes, she saw strange animals. Yes, she flew through the air. And no, she wasn't acting alone. There were more witches. Many more. You lean forward. This isn't just a confession, it's an origin story. Tituba's detailed and bizarre testimony opens the floodgates. She speaks of a tall man in black, of witches riding broomsticks, of secret meetings in the woods. Her confession reads like a grim fairy tale told by candlelight, and everyone listens. Why confess? That's the million-shilling question. Some think she was beaten. Others say she hoped confession might save her. After all, once you confess, you can become useful to the court by accusing others. It's a get-out-of-gallows card, kind of. Historians still debate whether Tituba understood the game or simply played the role expected of her. Meanwhile, Sarah Good refuses to confess. She lashes out, calls her accusers liars, and generally does nothing to make herself look innocent in the Puritan sense, which is to say, meek, silent, and pious. Osborne, too, denies the charges, though she's sick and barely coherent. The contrast between the defiant and the compliant begins to shape the court's logic. And you can't help but notice something unsettling. Confessing to witchcraft might actually be safer than denying it. So let's pause to consider the court's methods. One of the more eyebrow-raising tests used was touching. If an afflicted girl was having a fit, the accused would be made to touch her. If the fit stopped, it proved the accused had caused it. Flawless science, obviously. No room for error there. These aren't official trials yet, just pre-trial examinations. But already, the accusations are snowballing. Every confession leads to more names. Every denial is met with suspicion. Logic, like your sense of safety, has packed its bags and gone somewhere warmer. And as more women, and now even a few men, are caught in the growing web, you notice something else. The accused aren't just random nobodies anymore. They include respected townsfolk, wealthy landowners, and upstanding churchgoers. Witchcraft has moved from the margins to the middle class. One quirky detail you overhear: some of the afflicted start complaining about being pricked with invisible needles. Naturally, this leads to the creation of witch marks, strange blemishes or moles that inquisitors prod with long needles to test for pain. No pain? Witch confirmed. And yes, you are allowed to wince at this. You're only a few weeks into 1692, and already the foundation is cracking. Not just in the courts or the churches, but in the minds of the people. Accusation is no longer about certainty. It's about suspicion, about fear, about survival. And as you follow the next name whispered in the candlelit hush, you realize this is no longer a crisis. It's a movement. You try to convince yourself this is just a strange blip, a fever dream moment in colonial history. Surely it will burn out. But Salem, as it turns out, isn't done feeding the fire. The accusations keep multiplying like rabbits on a Puritan farmstead. Only now, they aren't just targeting the usual scapegoats, the poor, the widowed, the socially awkward. No, the web starts to creep upward into the more respectable corners of society. You clutch your cloak tighter. The spring winds are sharp, and so is the gossip. One morning, you hear that Martha Corey has been accused. That name makes your stomach clench. Martha isn't some fringe dweller. She's a devout member of the church. Married to Giles Corey, an older man who looks like he was carved from leftover barnwood and suspicion. Martha is vocal, too vocal, some might say, about her doubts. She thinks the girls are faking. She questions the court. She dares to scoff. In Salem, that's practically the same as summoning Satan on a Tuesday. So now, her disbelief becomes evidence. You see the twisted logic. Denying witchcraft becomes proof you're a witch. Believing in innocence means you're hiding guilt. The legal loop closes like a noose. And then comes Rebecca Nurse. You hear the gasps in the meeting house when her name is uttered. She's a matriarch of the community. Pious, charitable, elderly, even-tempered. She's the kind of woman people name their kids after. If she can be accused, anyone can. You feel the communal panic shift into something darker, more desperate. As if Salem has realized it stepped into a trap, but instead of backing out, it just starts walking faster. Historians still argue whether these higher-profile accusations were driven by sincere paranoia or strategic manipulation. Was it fear? Or was it a clever use of hysteria to eliminate rivals, seize land, and settle scores? And here's a quirky footnote. Some of the accused begin claiming they've seen books with many names in them. The Devil's Ledger, if you will. In one moment of breathy testimony, a girl claims there are over 100 witches in the colony. 100. It's like finding out your quiet book club is actually a demonic coven with a mailing list. Back in your imaginary boots, you attend one of the pre-trial hearings. The courtroom isn't what you expect. It's crowded, chaotic, and heavy with the smell of wool and anxiety. The afflicted girls perform as though auditioning for the role of possessed number 3 in an off-Broadway pageant. They shriek. They clutch at invisible wounds. They mimic each other's contortions with eerie precision. You glance at the magistrates, Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne. No powdered wigs here, just stern men squinting into the absurd and treating it as gospel. When one girl claims she sees a yellow bird perched on the shoulder of the accused, pecking at her eyes, no one laughs. They nod. Gravely. You suppress the urge to rub your own forehead. And while you're busy trying to parse logic from lunacy, Giles Corey, yes, the husband of accused Martha, strolls in and promptly disrupts everything. Now, Giles is an odd duck. He's been in trouble with the law before. Once even charged with murder for beating a farmhand to death. But he's also, curiously, deeply loyal to his wife. When the court tries to pressure him into confirming Martha's guilt, he barks at them. Refuses. His stubbornness becomes legendary, but also dangerous. Salem doesn't handle defiance well. So the Coreys, Martha and Giles, are folded into the spiraling madness. You see them as part of a bigger shift. The trials are no longer about witchcraft. They're about fear and compliance. About seeing how many dominoes can fall before someone decides to stand them back up. And yet, the court presses forward. It creates a new institution to handle the volume of chaos, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, established by Governor William Phips in May of 1692. A special tribunal just for witchcraft. Like a custom-built paranoia machine. The lead judge? William Stoughton. Imagine a man made entirely of rulebooks and chilly glances. He believes in spectral evidence, the testimonies about visions and ghostly attacks, and he's not interested in nuance. Spectral evidence becomes the court's sharpest tool. Your ghost pinch me is now enough to land you in shackles. And you're just one misstep away from becoming the next suspect. There's a strange, almost theatrical rhythm to it now. The afflicted cry out. The accused deny. The court condemns. Rinse and repeat. Salem begins to feel like a loop dream, the kind you can't wake from even though the signs of where are beginning to show. A local minister, Increase Mather, begins voicing concern. Quietly, carefully. He warns that it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. It's the kind of logic you'd expect to hold weight. But not here. Not yet. By now, your dreams of a quiet colonial vacation have thoroughly unraveled. You've watched respected townspeople hauled away, seen girls collapse in supernatural swoons, and listened to judges take ghost stories as gospel. And just when you think it can't get worse, it does. Because it's no longer just pretrial hearings and whispered accusations. It's time for real executions. It begins with Bridget Bishop. You know her. She's different. She dresses in bright colors, heaven forbid, a splash of red ribbon on her black Puritan gown. She owns a tavern. She's been married more than once. In Salem, that makes her practically a rock star of suspicion. The moment her name is floated, you can feel the tension tighten. She's brought before the court of oyer and terminer, and the proceedings unfold like a grim puppet show. The girls seize and cry on cue. The court nods solemnly. Bridget defends herself, of course, emphatically, even. But she's doomed from the start. Too many witnesses. Too much gossip. Too little Puritan chill. And so, on June 10th, 1692, Bridget Bishop becomes the first to hang. You're there, standing on the edge of Proctor's Ledge, a scrubby, unremarkable rise just outside Salem town. There's no grand gallows, no formal platform. Just a tree, some rope, and a watching crowd. Bridget dies without a final speech. Without a confession. Just the sound of wind and shoes scuffing in the dirt. It's jarring. You realize that death has finally entered the chat, and Salem is now fully in motion. Execution isn't the end of hysteria, it's fuel. After Bridget, the trials ramp up with frightening speed. Over the summer, 19 people will be hanged, and one, Giles Corey, will be pressed to death. And no, that's not a metaphor. Let's stay with Giles for a moment. Remember how he refused to testify? Refused to confess? That stubbornness earns him a particularly nasty fate. Under English law, refusal to plead could be punished by paying 40 dur, a process where heavy stones are placed on your chest until you either agree to speak or die. Giles chooses neither. He says nothing. Just one phrase, repeated over and over, more weight. It becomes legend. You can practically hear his rasped defiance under the crushing silence. And yes, historians still debate whether those were his exact words, but at this point, the myth and man are inseparable. His death is brutal, slow, crushing, literally. But it's also something else, a warning. The system has stopped pretending it wants truth. It only wants obedience. Quirky aside, Salem's jail is so overcrowded that prisoners are sometimes transferred to other towns or chained to the walls because there's no room in the cells. And yes, they have to pay for their own imprisonment. Food, shackles, even straw for bedding. It's like an escape room, but with fewer clues and significantly more fleas. You wander past the jailhouse on a humid July evening and hear a child crying. That would be Dorcas Good, age 4, accused of witchcraft after mimicking the afflicted girls. Her mother, Sarah Good, is already condemned. Dorcas has been shackled in a dank cell for months. Because apparently, the devil recruits preschoolers now. The trials continue with mechanical rhythm. Names blur together: George Burroughs, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe. Each condemned with just enough evidence to pass muster. And the public? At first, they gasp. Then they murmur. Then they nod. A turning point arrives in August. George Burroughs is accused. A former minister of Salem, educated at Harvard, physically imposing and well-spoken. He's brought to the gallows and, in a final moment that chills the crowd, recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly. This is a problem. Witches, it's believed, can't utter the sacred words. The onlookers falter. Some even weep. Surely this man is no witch. But it's too late. The rope tightens. The prayer dies on his lips. Historians still argue whether that moment planted the seeds of doubt. Whether seeing Burroughs die so godly forced Salem to blink. Even the quirky details grow darker. One rumor claims a spectral pig was seen rooting at the foot of the gallows. Another claims ghostly figures hover by the tree. Whether you believe it or not, it speaks to the town's unraveling sense of reality. By now, people are accusing others just to avoid suspicion. One widow offers up names like she's reading from a village directory. Land disputes surface conveniently in the testimony. If you've got an enemy, now's the time to call her a broom-riding night ghoul. You begin to suspect the devil has little to do with it. The real magic trick is how quickly reason has vanished. And if you're wondering what the clergy are doing during all this, well, that's complicated. Cotton Mather, son of Increase, is a rising voice in New England. He supports the trials, mostly. Urges caution, but endorses spectral evidence. His sermon game is strong, his logic a bit wobbly. By summer's end, the colony is straining under the weight of the madness. Executions mount. Families are ruined. Children are orphaned. The town's soul, once knit tight in cold faith and hard work, feels threadbare. And through it all, you stand in the square, watching. Just another invisible witness to the slow churn of panic, politics, and piety. The rope creaks. The crowd hushes. Salem doesn't flinch. The summer sun is still shining, but everything in Salem feels dimmer now. Like the entire town is stuck beneath a heavy quilt of fear and ash. You walk down the rutted main road and see people avoiding eye contact, crossing the street to avoid their neighbors. Gossip moves faster than carts. And nobody laughs anymore. Except maybe the afflicted girls, and even their performances are beginning to show signs of strain. By September, the numbers are dizzying, over 150 people accused. 19 executed. dozens languishing in prison. The judicial machine keeps clanking along, grinding through lives as if it were built for it. But something's shifting. You hear it in the murmurs after church, in the careful, hushed way people say the name Rebecca Nurse. Remember her? Pious. Elderly. The last person anyone expected to see in chains. She was convicted in July. But not easily. Her jury, imagine this, initially acquitted her. You'd think that would end it. But no. The judges, displeased with the result, asked them to reconsider. And the jury folded. Changed their verdict. Just like that. Now, you feel the tremors of regret echoing through the pews in town meetings. Rebecca's execution hits people harder than the others. There's something unbearably cruel about killing a woman who could barely walk without help, who had spent her life nursing the sick and feeding the hungry. Historians still argue whether her death marked the emotional tipping point of the trials. But many agree it's when Salem's soul began to ache. Then there's the case of John Proctor, a tavern keeper. Blunt, big personality, big opinions. He'd been skeptical of the trials from the start, publicly so. He called the afflicted girls frauds, called the judges fools. Not ideal survival strategy in 1692. Naturally, he's accused, along with his pregnant wife, Elizabeth. Their children, too. It's a family package deal, and one that shakes the town. John isn't meek. He petitions the governor, demands that the trials be moved to Boston, where cooler heads might prevail. He gathers over 30 signatures vouching for his integrity. It doesn't help. He's convicted in August. You imagine standing behind him in the courtroom, him, hands clenched, eyes steady, still trying to sound reasonable in the face of madness. But nothing lands. Not logic. Not loyalty. Not evidence. He hangs on August 19th. Elizabeth, thanks to her pregnancy, receives a stay of execution. A temporary delay. Not a pardon. Just a pause. A grim little mercy. There's irony here, too grim, sleepy irony. Many of the accused refuse to confess. You'd think admitting to witchcraft would save you, but in Salem, it's the opposite. A confession earns you life in prison. A denial, even with perfect behavior and spotless faith, gets you hanged. So naturally, many die not for what they did, but for insisting they didn't do it. And here comes one of the strangest quirks of all. The town starts running out of places to bury the bodies. The executed aren't given graves in consecrated ground. No headstones. No blessings. Their corpses are dumped into shallow pits near the gallows or quietly reclaimed by family under cover of darkness. A few are rumored to be buried by torchlight in unmarked woods. You walk past a patch of bramble near Gallows Hill and swear you see a boot heel poking from the earth. But you're probably just tired. Back inside the village, people are growing bolder in their doubts. A merchant in Ipswich jokes about spectral pigs. A preacher in Andover dares to criticize the court in a sermon. Even some of the afflicted girls, those once revered conduits of justice, are being side-eyed now. Their performances have become more theatrical, less consistent. One girl convulses at the sight of a witch's specter only to trip on her own skirt seconds later. Another accuses a dead woman of haunting her. Not a great look. And that's when something truly bizarre happens. The accusations spill beyond Salem. You blink. Suddenly, people in neighboring towns are being accused. Gloucester, Andover, Ipswich. The hysteria is migrating, like a plague with legs. At a trial in Andover, over 50 people are arrested in one fell swoop. A kind of judicial group discount. You watch as entire families, mothers, sons, grandfathers, are crammed into ox carts and rolled towards Salem, eyes wide, jaws clenched. Even animals aren't spared. One dog is executed for bewitching a child. Yes, a dog. Historians still debate whether that was literal or metaphorical, but either way, you're not taking chances. You avoid all terriers for the rest of your stay. The court, meanwhile, starts showing signs of strain. It's processing so many cases that it barely has time for theatrics anymore. Hearings become rushed. Evidence gets sloppier. Judges frown more often. And behind the scenes, a few whispers reach the governor's ears. That's William Phips, remember him? He created the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Probably didn't expect it to go full apocalyptic kangaroo tribunal. When he returns from fighting off French attacks in Maine and hears that his own wife has been named as a possible witch, well, let's just say priorities shift. In October, he dissolves the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Just like that. Snap. Dawn. And Salem exhales for the first time in months. But don't get too comfortable. The damage is done. The fear hasn't vanished. It just crouches lower now, waiting to be cleaned up. So now you're walking through a Salem that's suddenly quiet. Not peaceful, exactly. More like the uneasy silence that settles in a room after someone smashes a plate. People still whisper. Doors still close just a bit too fast when you pass. But something in the atmosphere has shifted. The Court of Oyer and Terminer is gone, dismantled by Governor Phips like a child realizing he's accidentally knocked over his ant farm, and now it's time to pretend nothing happened. But the accused? They're still imprisoned. Still shackled. Still very much caught in the machinery of something no longer in motion. And the townspeople? They're confused. Because there hasn't been a grand reckoning, no public declaration of we were wrong. Just a quiet cessation of hangings. No new trials for now. Just a vague collective decision to stop pretending that half the population is possessed. But that doesn't bring the dead back. You pass the nurse homestead. Her family still leaves a chair empty at dinner. Her sons walk a little slower through the fields. And no one says her name too loudly. Not because they've forgotten, but because they remember too well. In Boston, a new court is formed, the Superior Court of Judicature. It's supposed to clean up the mess. This time, spectral evidence is officially banned. That's right, no more accusing people based on ghost sightings or invisible birds only you can see. Funny how quickly things begin to fall apart without it. Most new accusations get tossed out. The new court seems eager to end this chapter, like a weary schoolteacher trying to erase the blackboard before class sees what was written. In January 1693, the trials grind to a halt. The remaining prisoners are slowly released. Some receive pardons. Others simply slip through the cracks. But let's not sugarcoat it. Those released return to a life forever changed. Their land? Gone, often seized. Their reputations? In tatters. Their health? Wrecked by months or years in prison cells colder than a Massachusetts winter and barely wide enough to lie down in. And then there's the bill. Yes, the bill. Because in true Puritan fashion, the colony sends many survivors an itemized invoice for their jail time. Straw bedding? That'll cost you. Chains? Rents due. Shackles? Not included in the price of admission. You trudge past a debtor's farm where a newly released prisoner is trying to rebuild. His hands tremble as he plants winter wheat. The soil is thin, and so is his hope. One of the more quietly horrifying episodes happens when several families are denied the return of their loved ones' bodies. Without burial rites or gravestones, the dead seem to vanish from the record. Like they were never there. Just names in court transcripts and bad dreams. This, of course, doesn't sit well with everyone. Some families begin quietly collecting bones from the Gallows Hill area, wrapping them in linen, whispering prayers over remains carried in secret, in basements, in candlelit attics, trying, in their own way, to undo what was done. And if you're thinking, well, at least the community came together afterward to heal, I admire your optimism. But no, reconciliation was slow, awkward, uneven. It took years before any official apologies were made. Decades, even. In 1706, and Putnam Jr., one of the leading accusers, stands before her church and confesses. She says she was misled by Satan. She's sorry. She cries. But whether that's catharsis or theater, historians still argue. And really, who could blame them? The lines between performance and belief, truth and terror, are so deeply tangled by now that even time has trouble slicing through them. As for Governor Phips, he vanishes from Massachusetts politics not long after. His star dims. Cotton Mather? He continues writing, but his reputation is stained. Increase Mather, the elder? He stays relatively silent, perhaps recognizing the limits of both theology and power when things spiral too far. And what of the afflicted girls? Well, that depends. Some marry. Some vanish into history. Others, like Mercy Lewis, continue having fits for years. She becomes something of a traveling phenomenon. There's talk of possession, of prophecy, of punishment. And yet, she always lands on her feet. Which leads to one of the strangest footnotes in the whole story. No one from the core group of accusers is ever punished. They were young. They were believed. And by the time the dust settled, it was easier to blame vague mass hysteria than to hold any one person accountable. There's a lesson there, but it's as slippery as eel stew. Speaking of stew, yes, here comes your quirky tidbit. Did you know that some historians once theorized that the Salem girls might have been hallucinating from ergot poisoning? That's a fungus that grows on rye and can induce convulsions, hallucinations, and paranoia. Like LSD with a colonial twist. Fun theory. Not widely accepted. But it makes for a great dinner conversation, especially if you're serving colonial bread. As you stroll back toward the village green, you see children playing again. You hear a fiddle. Someone's cooking something that doesn't smell like despair. Maybe apple pudding. Maybe something with cinnamon. The darkness hasn't disappeared, but it's been pushed back a bit. Enough to let in a little music. You pass the old meeting house and glance up at its bell tower. No one rings it anymore, not for witches, not for warnings. It just sits there, a quiet relic of louder, uglier times. The village is healing. Slowly. Unevenly. Like scar tissue after a burn. And in the distance, just beyond the tree line, you think you'd hear a whisper. Not a ghost. Just the wind. Maybe. Time keeps passing, but Salem never quite returns to what it was. You feel it as you walk past shuttered doors, or when someone crosses themselves just a beat too slowly. There's something fractured beneath the surface, like the whole town cracked open a year and now walks with a permanent limp. By the early 1700s, the colony is finally starting to realize that, yes, perhaps they went a bit too far. Just a tad. Maybe executing your neighbors for hanging out with invisible cats wasn't the best look. In 1702, the General Court of Massachusetts declares that the trials were unlawful. It's the first official step toward trying to fix what broke. You hear the words in the meeting house, dry and careful, like someone reading from a sheet of parchment they'd rather not touch. No one cheers. Because what do you even say at a moment like that? Oops. By 1711, the colony takes a bolder step. It passes a bill to restore the civil rights of some of the accused. They even offer financial restitution, money to the families of those who were wrongfully convicted, imprisoned, or executed. It's something. It's not enough. You sit beside a widow who lost her husband to the noose. She receives £20 in compensation. Enough to buy a few cows and repair a fence. Not enough to erase what she saw. Not enough to make her sleep without clutching his old hat under the pillow. Interestingly, not all families accept the money. Some refuse out of pride. Others out of principle. And some just can't bear to put a price on what was lost. And still, even amid all this cautious backpedaling, there are people who whisper, maybe some of them were witches. You hear it at the edges of conversations, like a persistent cough. As if some part of the hysteria still lives on, buried under layers of polite regret. This is where the town splits. You begin to notice that Salem starts distancing itself from Salem Village. Yes, there's a geographic and social divide forming. Salem Town, the more urban, mercantile hub near the coast, wants none of the witchcraft stain. It quietly lets the rural village further inland shoulder the blame. And eventually, in 1752, the village gets a rebrand. It renames itself Danvers. Yes, Danvers. It's like when someone burns toast and just throws the whole toaster away. No witches here anymore, just scenic autumns and affordable livestock. Historians still argue whether this name change was purely administrative or a quiet act of collective shame. But you can feel it in the way people sigh when they say the old name, Salem, like they're tasting ash. But of course, history doesn't stay quiet. In the 19th century, Salem gets a revival of sorts, not as a place of horror, but as a subject of literature. Writers like Nathaniel Hawthorne, whose great-great-grandfather was a judge during the trials, begin exploring the town's dark past in their stories. You read The House of the Seven Gables, and somewhere in the prose, you catch the scent of regret wrapped in oak wood and candle wax. Funny thing, Hawthorne even added the W to his last name to distance himself from Judge Hathorne. A literary sigh. And that's when it starts. Salem, once the site of panic and persecution, begins to transform into something else entirely, a kind of symbol. By the 20th century, it's no longer just a town, it's a brand. Witches on postcards, haunted tours, Halloween festivals. You pass gift shops selling pointy hats and broomstick keychains, and you wonder, is this honoring the past or profiting from it? The answer, of course, is yes. There's a museum now. A memorial. Several, actually. One near the old Gallows Hill. You walk along its stone path, lined with granite benches, each etched with the names of the executed and the date they died. It's quiet. Heavy. You sit down and feel the cold of the stone seep through your coat. No judgment. No accusations. Just names, patiently waiting to be remembered. And here's a strange fact. We don't even know the exact spot of the original gallows. The executions likely happened near what's now Proctor's Ledge, confirmed only in recent years through scholarly research and ground-penetrating radar. Imagine people lived nearby for generations, unaware they were gardening on execution grounds. There's something deeply Salem about that horror hidden under hydrangeas. You stand at the ledge, wind whistling through oak branches, and try to picture it. The makeshift platform. The ropes. The way the crowd stood packed together, not because they wanted to see, but because they could not. And then, one last oddity, Tituba, the enslaved woman whose story helped ignite this entire mess. She survives. She never stands trial. Eventually, someone pays her jail fees, and she disappears from the record. Historians debate her role endlessly. Was she a victim? A manipulator? A believer? A storyteller caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Probably all of the above. And now, as you walk back through the modern-day streets, where tour guides wear black cloaks and teenagers sip pumpkin lattes near plaques that say site of the old jail, you realize something odd. Salem hasn't forgotten its past. It's just turned it into a costume, which is maybe the only way a town this haunted can survive. You keep walking, past souvenir shops with glittery tarot cards, past bakeries selling hex cupcakes, past that one guy dressed like a warlock who's clearly just thrilled to be part of something. It's Salem, present day. The scar has turned into a tattoo, and now everyone wants a piece of it. But somewhere just out of frame, you know there's a deeper story still, one that doesn't fit on a t-shirt. It's the quieter aftermath that never made it into the brochures. The long, strange fallout that shaped not just Salem, but colonial America as a whole. Because after 1693, the witch trials didn't simply vanish like a bad dream. No, they left marks on law, on theology, on the very idea of justice. And you're going to stroll through those consequences like a guest in a museum with no exit signs. Start with the legal system. The Salem debacle was so catastrophic that the colonies were basically forced to rethink their courtroom protocols. The concept of innocent until proven guilty wasn't just a suggestion anymore, it became a necessity. Courts started demanding harder evidence. No more convicting folks because someone claimed to see their spirit choking a goat at midnight. Spectral evidence, once accepted like bad Yelp reviews, became taboo. Historians still argue whether this shift was a direct reaction to Salem or part of a broader Enlightenment wave rolling in from Europe. Either way, something cracked open in the colonial mind. Maybe belief wasn't enough. Then there's religion. Puritanism never fully recovered. You can feel it unraveling as you listen to sermons in the years that follow. There's less fire, less brimstone. Congregations grow skeptical. Ministers begin questioning whether human interpretation of God's will should be quite so literal. Some leave the church entirely. Others drift toward quieter denominations. The Great Awakening is still decades off, but the spiritual restlessness is already brewing. And politics? Well, the trials revealed just how flimsy the line between religious authority and state power had become. Afterward, governors grew cautious about letting theology guide policy. Too many dead. Too much embarrassment. Massachusetts, once a theocratic stronghold, began nudging toward a more secular model, gradually, begrudgingly, but unmistakably. And here's something truly weird. After Salem, witch trials actually became harder to stage. Instead of creating a blueprint for persecution, the event became a kind of national cautionary tale. You'd think it might have inspired more panic. Instead, it taught the colonies to chill. Just a little. You reach into your pocket and pull out a pamphlet, an old one, printed in 1704 by Robert Calif. It's a takedown of Cotton Mather, a blistering critique of the hysteria and the theology behind it. At the time, Calif was just a merchant, not a scholar. But his words spread, planting seeds of doubt in people's minds. Cotton Mather, who once fancied himself the intellectual rock star of Puritanism, spends the rest of his life defending his involvement. But even he knows his legacy is complicated. Speaking of legacies, what about the accusers? And Putnam Jr., as you remember, gave her apology in 1706. But the others? Silence. Abigail Williams disappears from the record. Mercy Lewis, too. Some historians think Mercy fled to Maine. Others think she may have continued claiming visions. Still others wonder whether she simply faded into marriage and obscurity. There are no statues of them. No streets named in their honor. Just footnotes. Blurred faces in an old tragedy. You sit down on a bench near a weathered sign that says Salem, birthplace of the modern Halloween. There's irony here. The town that once hanged people for dabbling in magic now hosts parades where thousands dress up as witches for fun. Tourists take selfies in front of gravestones. Actors stage reenactments. And every October, the population swells like a balloon at a child's birthday party. It's equal parts history and performance. Is it respectful? Tacky? A coping mechanism? A marketing scheme? Again, yes. But underneath the cosplay and capitalism, the memory still lingers. In court transcripts, in gravestone rubbings, in the faint echo of a rope swinging in the wind. And somewhere in the middle of all this, a larger truth settles into your chest like a stone sinking in water. Salem wasn't an isolated event. It was a mirror. A mirror held up to fear, to power, to the human tendency to believe the unbelievable if enough people nod along. Historians still argue what triggered it all. Was it mass hysteria? Political tension? Religious mania? Moldy bread? But one thing's clear, you don't need a bubbling cauldron or a black cat to conjure a witch hunt. All you need is fear, a scapegoat, and a crowd that's already made up its mind. You lean back, look up at the sky turning lavender over the rooftops of modern-day Salem, and think, if it happened once, it could happen again. Different clothes. Different names. Same hunger. But for now, it's quiet. The cobblestones cool beneath your shoes. Somewhere, someone lights a candle, not out of superstition, but memory. And that, perhaps, is the real spell, the power of remembering. Even if the remembering hurts. The wind kicks up as you round the corner of Chestnut Street, where Victorian houses cast lone shadows across Salem's uneven sidewalks. It's peaceful now, quaint even. And yet, every crack in the pavement feels like an echo. The kind of town where memory clings like fog. You pause at the Salem Witch Trials Memorial again. You've been here before, but tonight it feels different. The granite benches jut out from a low stone wall, each etched with a name and date of execution. It's not grand. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. This part, the remembering, is the work of centuries. It wasn't until 1957, more than 2.5 centuries after the trials, that Massachusetts formally apologized for the tragedy. They passed legislation to clear some of the names. Just some. The others had to wait. It's not until 2001, yes, 2001, that all 20 victims are finally exonerated. And even then, they had to squeeze the final names into an unrelated budget bill. Like history needed to sneak in through the side door. You tilt your head. Let that sink in. It took longer to clear the names of innocent people than it did to invent the internet, launch satellites, and clone a sheep. There's no ceremony. No trumpet fanfare. Just a line of legalese buried beneath tax amendments and roadwork funding. Historians still argue why it took so long. Was it shame? Bureaucratic inertia? Or maybe, just maybe, because admitting guilt means remembering. And remembering can be exhausting. And yet, people do it. Quietly. Persistently. You see it in school kids writing essays. In amateur genealogists tracing family lines back to proctor or nurse or good. In artists and writers and playwrights who revisit 1692 like it's unfinished business. And it is unfinished business. Because even though you're in Salem, Massachusetts, the echoes travel far. Every time society turns its suspicion inward, every time fear triumphs over reason, you hear that old whisper again, she's a witch. It's not always literal anymore. These days, the accused might be a scientist, a teacher, a neighbor who thinks differently. But the machinery of panic? That hums along just fine. You remember the way people confessed in Salem, not because they were guilty, but because not confessing meant death. You remember how those who held their ground, like Giles Corey, were crushed, literally. It's a chilling lesson. Sometimes, speaking the truth is the most dangerous thing you can do. And here's something even stranger. In 2022, a young girl named Elizabeth Johnson Jr., one of the last still unpardoned accused witches, finally received legal exoneration. It took a group of 8th grade civics students, yes, 8th graders, in North Andover to get it done. They researched her case, wrote letters, pushed lawmakers, and succeeded. You smile. It's almost poetic. The youngest minds correcting the oldest mistakes. It reminds you that history isn't dead. It breathes, shifts, and occasionally gets kicked in the ribs by a 12-year-old with a public school Chromebook. And then there's pop culture. Witches, once the stuff of whispered accusation and gallows, are now icons. Halloween staples. Television protagonists. Instagram aesthetics. You can't walk 2 blocks in Salem without seeing someone in a velvet cloak or a man bun with a pentagram earring, which is, let's face it, basically the same thing. This cultural embrace is odd, but fascinating. It's a reclamation, a rewrite, maybe even a bomb. But you wonder, does turning history into spectacle help us heal it, or does it make us forget? Historians disagree. Of course they do. That's their thing. Some argue that the commercialization of Salem dilutes the tragedy. Others say it keeps the conversation alive. But you know that the line between remembrance and performance is thin. And it shifts every time a tour guide raises their voice for dramatic effect. Still, amid all the fog machines and cobwebs, there's a quiet dignity that survives. You hear it in the way locals correct tourists who giggle at the word witch. You see it in the fresh flowers left at memorial sites with no card, no explanation. You feel it when someone says Sarah good and doesn't laugh. Because the truth is, history doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for attention. And here, under the glow of antique street lamps and the smell of cinnamon from a nearby cafe, you realize something simple but profound. The Salem witch trials weren't just about witches. They were about fear, about authority, about how easy it is to believe something dangerous when everyone else believes it too. And that makes it timeless. Because the moment you think, we'd never do something like that today, history leans over and whispers, "Are you sure?" You step away from the memorial and head toward the nearby Ropes mansion, its colonial facade weathered but proud, a silent witness to centuries of stories. Inside, the rooms are quiet, with antique furniture draped in the soft glow of lamplight. It's easy to imagine the people who lived here, navigating the strange new world of Salem after the trials. You find yourself thinking about the families left behind, especially those of the accused. It's one thing to read about the trials, it's another to picture the wives, children, and neighbors who suddenly had to live alongside suspicion and grief, sometimes for decades. Take the Proctor family, for example. John Proctor, a farmer with a stubborn streak, was one of the most famous victims. But after his execution, his wife Elizabeth was left to pick up the pieces. Historians still debate how she managed to survive socially and economically during such a hostile time. Some say she relied on her church community, others argue she kept to herself, quietly enduring. Her story is a reminder that life went on, often painfully, for those who remained. You can almost hear the creak of wooden floors as Elizabeth tends to her small farm, every glance from a neighbor a possible accusation. There's a quirky detail here too. Despite her husband's execution for witchcraft, Elizabeth was later allowed to live because she was pregnant at the time. This led to a strange legal limbo. Her unborn child was innocent, even if the father was not. That kind of legal reasoning feels like a plot twist in a soap opera, but it's pure 17th century reality. Speaking of legal oddities, remember Giles Corey? The man pressed to death for refusing to plead? His last words, "more weight," have become legendary. But here's a little-known fact. Some historians think that the pressing wasn't as quick or merciful as tales suggest. Instead, it was a slow, excruciating ordeal designed to force a plea. And yet, Corey refused. Why? Some scholars argue it was a legal tactic. By not pleading, he prevented his estate from being seized by the court, preserving it for his family. Others believe it was sheer stubbornness or protest. That mix of desperation and defiance echoes through time, reminding you that even in the darkest moments, human resilience shines. On the subject of defiance, let's look at Mary Eastie, another accused woman who maintained her innocence until the end. Her calmness before execution reportedly unsettled witnesses, and her final words hinted at forgiveness rather than fear. It's a powerful image, dignity in the face of terror. Yet, not all stories from Salem are somber. You might find it amusing that during the trials, some accused witches were believed to have the power to afflict people with invisible pins or pricks. Yes, invisible pins. Townsfolk claimed to feel sudden stabs of pain, blamed on spectral witchcraft. It's like an early version of a haunted acupuncture session. Historians debate whether these afflictions were psychosomatic, mass hysteria, or outright fabrication. Either way, they highlight the bizarre blend of superstition and fear that fueled the frenzy. As you wander the mansion's dim corridors, you realize the Salem witch trials were not just a local tragedy but a complex web of human emotion, fear, hope, cruelty, and kindness. You sit by a window, watching the moonlight spill over the gardens outside, and consider how stories like Salem's remind us about the dangers of rushing to judgment, the power of community, and the importance of empathy. And with that thought, you feel the weight of history settling gently around you, not as a burden, but as a quiet lesson. You find yourself wandering back toward the town square, where the modern and the historical mingle quietly. The brick sidewalks feel familiar beneath your feet, but the weight of centuries rests heavily here. You stop at the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, a serene, almost sacred place designed to honor those accused and executed. The gentle arrangement of stones invites reflection, a contrast to the chaos that once engulfed the town. You sit on a bench nearby and let your thoughts drift to the broader social and political context of 1692. Salem wasn't an isolated village, it was part of a volatile colonial frontier, buffeted by wars, economic stresses, and religious fervor. The Puritan leaders believed they were fighting a cosmic battle between good and evil, a fight that made the witch trials feel like necessary evil rather than an aberration. You probably won't survive a day in that mindset, but it's key to understanding how ordinary neighbors could turn on each other so quickly. Fear, after all, is a contagious thing. There's a quirky detail here. In the midst of the witch hysteria, the town's small militia was busy preparing for potential attacks from Native American tribes and the French. Some historians argue that the collective anxiety over these external threats fed directly into the paranoia that sparked accusations. You try to picture the everyday lives of these colonists, mothers cooking over hearth fires, children playing near the docks, men repairing fishing boats, all while dark rumors spread like wildfire. The human capacity to hold normalcy and terror side by side is strangely fascinating. The legal proceedings themselves were chaotic by today's standards. Spectral evidence, testimony that the accused spirit appeared to torment others, was accepted in court, a practice that would be laughable now, if not so tragic then. Historians still debate whether the judges truly believed in the spectral evidence or if it was a convenient tool to convict unpopular individuals. Speaking of unusual legal quirks, remember Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed? Her reputation as a tavern keeper and a bit of a free spirit made her a target. Some contemporaries whispered she danced too freely or wore colorful clothes, which today sounds more like someone who just liked a good party. That image contrasts starkly with the grim seriousness of the trials, reminding you that the people involved were complex and flawed, just like anyone else. In your mind's eye, you see the courtroom drama unfolding, the fearful glances, the hesitant confessions, the desperate pleas. It's a theater of human frailty, fear, and the desperate search for control. And despite all this, the trials lasted only about a year, a rapid, intense burst of hysteria before cooler heads prevailed. That swift rise and fall leaves you wondering about the delicate balance between justice and chaos, and how easily one can slip into the other. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, letting the silence wrap around you like a soft blanket. The lessons of Salem whisper on the wind, urging caution, empathy, and the courage to question. The dawn breaks slowly as you stroll toward the outskirts of Salem, where the forest edges creep quietly toward the town. The cool morning mist wraps around you like a soft shawl, muting the sounds of waking birds and distant footsteps. You imagine the deep woods beyond, dark and tangled, often blamed for harboring secrets and witches alike. You recall how the Puritans feared the wilderness not just as untamed nature but as a spiritual battleground where evil lurked. The forest was both a physical and symbolic boundary. Beyond it lay unknown dangers, both earthly and supernatural. There's a curious little fact here. Some of the accused witches were believed to have held coven meetings deep in the forest, where they supposedly conspired with the devil. But historians still argue whether these secret gatherings ever actually happened or were simply a product of collective imagination and fear. As you walk beneath towering oaks and maples, you can almost hear whispers in the rustling leaves, stories of old fears mingling with the wind. It's striking how much of Salem's tragedy came from a community trying to enforce strict conformity in an uncertain world. The fear of difference and the need for control often found an outlet in accusations of witchcraft. You pass by a cluster of wildflowers growing stubbornly through cracks in the stone wall, a reminder of resilience and quiet persistence amid hardship. Back in town, you ponder how the trials left a lasting imprint not just on Salem's history but on its culture. The town today embraces its eerie legacy with a blend of respect and humor. Witches appear in art, souvenirs, and festivals, sometimes walking a fine line between honoring victims and celebrating folklore. You might chuckle at the thought of tourists in pointy hats sipping pumpkin spice lattes, oblivious to the complex history behind their whimsical costumes. There's a gentle irony in how Salem has transformed tragedy into a source of identity and economic survival. Historians debate whether this commodification dilutes the memory of the real victims or keeps their stories alive in an accessible way. Either way, the echoes of 1692 ripple outward, touching literature, film, and even legal thought, reminders of what happens when fear overrides justice. As you take a deep breath of crisp morning air, you feel the layers of time folding softly around you, the past and present blending like threads in a tapestry. The deep, dark history of Salem is never far away. It hums beneath the surface, waiting patiently for those willing to listen. And now, as you prepare for the final stretch of this journey, you carry with you a new understanding, a quiet respect for a community's pain and resilience, and the timeless lessons it offers. The afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows over Salem's cobblestone streets as you make your way back toward the town center. The day's warmth seeps gently into your skin, mingling with a soft breeze carrying distant laughter from a nearby cafe. You feel the story winding down, the tension ebbing away like the last notes of a lullaby. You think about the survivors, the families left behind, the community struggling to heal after such deep wounds. Some accused were eventually exonerated, though justice came too late to save their lives or ease the scars. Memorials stand as quiet testimonies to that slow journey toward redemption. A strange, comforting detail, the phrase witch hunt has become part of everyday language, a reminder of how history shapes not just facts but ideas and warnings. Salem's story warns against hysteria, prejudice, and the dangers of unchecked power. Historians still debate the exact causes of the trials, from psychological phenomena like mass hysteria to political rivalries, economic pressures, and religious zeal. Maybe it was all of these, woven into a perfect storm. You settle on the idea that history isn't about simple villains or heroes, it's messy, human, and deeply nuanced. You find a quiet corner in a small park, the soft rustle of leaves overhead a soothing backdrop. The trial's legacy, once a source of terror, now feels like a whisper of wisdom. You breathe out slowly, letting the weight of the past ease from your shoulders. The moon rises, casting a silvery glow that softens the edges of the world. You imagine the town of Salem asleep, peaceful and still, far from the chaos of centuries ago. And as you close your eyes, the story fades gently, like the last flicker of candlelight. You're left with a quiet sense of connection to the people who lived, feared, and hoped in that distant time. This deep, dark history is no longer just a tale of fear. It's a reminder of resilience, compassion, and the courage to face the unknown with open eyes. Now, as you drift towards sleep, may these stories soothe and settle your mind. Remember, history's shadows can teach us how to find the light. Good night. As the night deepens around you, imagine the quiet streets of Salem wrapped in a gentle hush, the world softening into calm. The whispers of the past settle like a delicate breeze, carrying lessons wrapped in warmth and understanding. Let your thoughts slow, each breath a soft tide pulling you toward restful sleep. Feel the heaviness of the day slip away, replaced by a peaceful quietness that cradles your mind like a feather pillow. The stories you've heard tonight are not just echoes of fear, but gentle reminders of the strength that lives within us all. As you sink deeper into comfort, know that you are safe, surrounded by the timeless embrace of history's gentle glow. Let the darkness hold you tenderly, and may your dreams be filled with light and softness. Sleep well, and until we meet again, rest easy in the calm. It has begun to rain now. Enjoy the rain and sweet dreams.